Hey everybody, Nick here, and today we're going to do a little disassembly and maintenance on this little guy right here. This is the Viper Dan number 2, or Don, or something or another. Either way, it's a very interesting little knife, and most interesting perhaps is that this is a friction folder, or a slip joint depending how you wanted to find it. But either way, there is no lock in this knife whatsoever. You can see that the knife is just a single handle with a blade that rotates relatively freely. That relatively turns out to be interesting, and we'll get there. But, yeah, so let's go ahead and take this guy apart and see what we can do for the action here. Already, we can see there's kind of an interesting screw here. Maybe there's a collar around it, something along those lines. A little different than what you normally get. Now, it looks like we're in T6 territory, which is never perfect, but will work. Okay, pop these guys out, and I'm just going to lay them out in the order they came off the knife here. Beautiful. It looks like there's some sort of a skeleton, it's not skeletonized. Looks like there's a full steel liner in here. Interesting that that one's not popping out, but we'll find out what else is up here. There we go. That's popping loose. This one in the middle, though, is not coming out. Okay, so my immediate thought here, there we go. That's weird. Okay, it's just not a very long screw. I'm wondering whether there were different size screws here and we didn't know that fact. Okay, hey, here we go. Alrighty, so this is actually coming apart pretty easy. I'm going to go ahead and pop out these interior screws that are holding on the bottom end of this. I'll say this is a little bit complicated for a friction folder. It's not like a criticism at this point, but it is a little bit unexpected. Although it makes sense at some level because they need to be able to hold these scales together, and interestingly enough, you can see that the clip mounts here to this backspacer, which is actually really nice. Not only does it allow for a very deep carry on the clip, but it is also ambidextrous in a way without leaving ugly holes on the side you're not using. There's a lot of good to this. So, you know, I'll give them credit there. But, you know, hey, whatever. Come on, you little bugger. Come out of there. Okay. Now I'm wondering whether this is a separately, like whether I'm going to need a separate wrench or something like that to pop these guys off. I'm thinking I might, because I'm seeing little, like, jaw marks on there. So what I think is happening here is that this is like a separately screwed in sort of area here. What looks to be a pivot. So I'm going to go ahead and just try and rotate this a little bit and see what comes of it. I don't know what's happening right now. The other option is that this is, I'll have to undo the back side as well. Let's try that. It's so interesting. It looks like both sides are... Well, this guy just rotates up out of the way. Well, that's interesting. There aren't screws on the other side. Okay. So, guys, I'm confused here. That's not new for the channel at all. Probably use the right size driver. But it doesn't appear that there are screws going through to the other side. Maybe these guys are long enough to put in there. Yeah, okay, never mind. So when those screws come in, they actually contact the liner on the other side. So all I actually need to do here to pop this out here is to lift this piece up. And then that should do the rest here. The pivot is still confusing me rather strongly, because this isn't coming loose in the way I would expect. My next step here is going to be to just try and unscrew these back scale screws. This is a very odd beast right here. It could be that once I pop these scale screws out, that the pivot is actually, the important part of the pivot is actually on the other side there, that I'll only be able to access it from, or maybe I just have no idea what the heck I'm doing. If somebody from Viper Technicut is watching this right now, my deepest apologies for, well, being hashtag not a brilliant man, what with your knife here. All right. So I have now unscrewed every damn screw on this knife. Well, this is weird. Okay, check this out. So it looks like on both sides... Okay, I get it now. This little guy here is the back side of a post that screws into this little guy on the front side. So if I were to rotate this, it would just rotate the back side as well. And in fact, to disassemble this knife, I will require 2 different sets of pliers. Guys, it doesn't need to be this complicated. I'm not a knife maker, what the hell do I know, but at the same time, whoa there. But at the same time, I can pretty safely guarantee you that this doesn't need to be this complicated. No doubt they have wrenches that'll fit this better than these needle nose pliers do, but you know what? For the moment, I use what I have. Come on. Oh, you little bugger. I want to thank very much my buddy William Tungelstedt for donating this knife to the channel for me to use and abuse. I'm kind of suspecting that these guys are red Loctited shut. And given that I don't have the proper wrench for these guys here, I'm actually leading towards not fighting this. So instead, we're going to take it just down this far. And that's not something I love, I'll be honest with you, but you know what? It's something that I'm going to have to do. So what I'm going to do here is just try and soak out some of the crap as best as I can. Oh, Viper. This thing is overly designed, if that makes sense. I feel like, you know, even with the dual ball detent system here, you could probably have made this a little bit more straightforwardly. And there's probably a reason that most knives are not being done in this way. Pour a little bit more booze. I'm just using rubbing alcohol here. My goal is just to try and extrude some of the crap in here. One thing that you can see while we're inside here, even though we're not able to go any further really, is that this has a detent ball on both sides. And so this is how you get the strongish detent that this knife has. It's sort of akin to the way that a lot of folks will do a detent with a separate bar on there rather than the lock bar, like Emerson comes to mind immediately, but so you can dial it in a little bit more, but, you know, in this particular case, having it on both sides, I imagine, just strengthens that a little bit there. So, man, this is singularly unsatisfying, I'm going to say that. As a disassembly guy, I mean, yeah, it's going to be fine. It'll work out okay afterwards, and this is not exactly an action-heavy sort of knife. In fact, you could probably make an argument that you don't want this pivot to be too free. You want to have to fight it. But, oh boy. Anyways, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a very thin oil, and I happen to have the 5-weight nano oil here. And the reason for that is that the 5-weight is very, very, very light, and so it'll penetrate a little bit better than the 10-weight or the 85-weight, God help me, and probably get a little closer into there. I'm also wondering and kind of suspecting that there actually aren't washers inside there. There may be. If they are, they're very, very thin. Maybe. Hey, if you're re-watching this review and you've taken one of these apart all the way, let me know. Let the people know in the comments whether there were washers in it or not. I'd be curious to find that out. Go ahead and drop a little bit more in there. Drop a little bit more in there. This will help to oil the detent ball. Totally over lubricating, but you know what? That's my lot in life, it seems. So it is running a little bit smoother now that I've gotten some of the junk out of there and now that I've lubricated the inside there. But unfortunately, I'm still not going to be able to get all the way up in there and clean things out. What I am going to do, however, is since these guys are look to be some flavor of steel or another, I am going to go ahead and apply a little bit of this. This is Frog Lube. It is a rust protectant. There are plenty of other rust protectants out there, but this is the one I like best, partly because it doesn't smell like death, unlike some other options, and partly because, well, I don't know. It's easy to apply, it's easy to remove. Generally speaking, it works better if you use a little bit of heat, but for what I'm doing here, it's not super necessary in any event, so I think that's fine. So there we go. We've now got the Frog Lube onto the liners here. Oh, man. Disappointing. And then this screw doesn't want to come out at all. I I'm not super impressed by that. But you know what? Whatever. Moving along. Since I'm here, I might as well just screw that freaking thing down. Actually, I just injured myself by doing that because now I can't get to this screw underneath there. Oy, oy, oy. Okay, so let's go ahead and drop these scales back on there. I believe this to be the proper orientation for them. Yeah, I did just screw myself by putting that on there because, by tightening that down, that is. I'll try and pull this off. Windy as heck out there. You're probably hearing it through an open window. There we go. Alright, so now what I'm going to do, I got to drop this little guy in the middle there. Come on now. Yeah, that's one of those guys. I'm going to use some blue Loctite on this. You can see there's actually a little bit of blue on the screws already, implying they did the same thing. Whatever. Tighten that on down here. You know, okay, I got to level with you guys, and gals for that matter. I got to level with you, whoever the heck you are, because at some level, the problem I have here is my problem, not this knife's problem. I tend to come from the perspective of you should be able to break a tool down entirely and, access all the parts you need, etc. I look at that as, saying it's a right is completely ridiculous, but is something that, you should be able to do as the final consumer. If you choose to, if you have the skill and desire. But, that's not really, strictly speaking, always necessary. I gotta align this properly, hold on. And so in a knife like this, especially one that is pretty straightforward and simple, look, this knife would work fine without doing any of what I'm doing right here for its lifetime, I suspect. And so my desire to do this, to get in there to break things down, is entirely within me. And so I don't want to feel like I'm just crapping on Technicut for making the decision to use these weird things on the inside there. I don't love it personally, but at the same time, there are many, many greater sins that they could have committed in making this knife, and so, I gotta balance that out. It's distasteful to me personally, but probably it's not actually a problem. There we go. But like I said, it is a little bit personally distasteful. I want the ability to maintain my tools. That's a thing that's really of some desire to me. And so something like that, where I know there were problems, and I could have probably won if I really fought for it. Go ahead and throw in the pivots right now. I don't know. It's just annoying. But like I said, I try to be upfront when I've got a problem that's not rational. And I'm willing to admit that perhaps my emphasis on disassembly is not entirely rational. But I kind of suspect as well, though, that a bunch of people who watch the channel feel the same way. Let me know in the comments, frankly, if you do. If this bothers you, if you had this knife and that would bother you. It won't change my final opinion, but I'm curious to see who all feels that way. Alright, so I gotta loosen this up a little bit. Now getting the blade back to centered may be ultimately a little tricky. Yeah, this is a little tight on this side here. Loosen that up, tighten this up. Unfortunately, with the two independent screws there for the pivot, it makes it a little tricky to dial in. It's a little too tight still. There we go, and there we go. There we go. That actually feels pretty nice. No, it's now. I gotta tighten this. No. I'm still getting a sense of exactly which of these is doing what centering here. Well, and actually, I'll go ahead and throw in the rest of the handle screws while I'm doing this. Guess it can't hurt. Ay, ay, ay. At the very, very least, in my final review, you can count on me mentioning the fact that this knife is really freaking fiddly. And what I usually mean when I say that is that it's just, I don't know, it's more complicated, I think, than it needs to be. And that's a frustration, always. I will say, though, one thing I've just noticed, actually, is that the lanyard hole is kind of nicely done. You've just got a solid punch through right there. So it'll go right through the clip if you want it to. Yeah. And see, actually, you can see that by putting some extra oil in there, some of the gunk is coming out of the pivot in this little region here, which is nice, actually. You know, it's it'll be a gradual process as opposed to just being able to get in there and freaking clean. But, you know, we are making some progress. And actually, the knife is now back together, and actually, it's now centered. Let's check for side-to-side blade play here. There is none. The vertical blade play doesn't make sense on an unlocking knife, but, you know, everything seems to be pretty well in order here. And aside from this gunk that's going to be extruding for the next 2 months, basically, knife seems otherwise fine. One other approach you could always take would be to run this underwater, for instance, with some soap. You know, you can probably get a little bit more of that out of there, but again, this isn't something I'm super concerned about. The knife hasn't been abused or anything like that, so there you go. This is the Viper Dan number 2 here. Hope you found this interesting, if not maybe a little dissatisfying. But regardless, I hope that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of the day and that everything else in your life is satisfying. All right, bye now.